The Second Battle of the Aisne was a French attempt to inflict a decisive defeat on the German armies in France by an offensive of several French army groups. The attacks became known as the Nivelle offensive and began on 9 April with the Battle of Arras. The French attacks began on 16 April 1917 against the German-occupied Chemin des Dames ridge, some 110 kilometers to the northeast of Paris and south of the city of Laon. On 17 April the French Fourth Army, further to the south, began the Battle of the Hills. Robert Nivelle, commander-in-chief of the French army, laid the plan in December 1916 after he had replaced Joseph Joffre, who had lost the confidence of the French government and been removed from office. The objective of the Nivelle offensive was to secure the prominent 80 kilometers long east-west ridge of the Chemin des Dames and then to move north to capture the city of Laon. The Chemin des Dames ridge had been quarried for stone for centuries, leaving a warren of caves and tunnels which were used as shelters by German troops to escape the French bombardment. The offensive met massed German machine gun fire, which inflicted many casualties and repulsed the French infantry at many points. The French achieved some substantial tactical successes and took c. 29,000 prisoners in their attacks on the Aisne and in Champagne, but failed to achieve their strategic objective of inflicting a decisive defeat on the Germans. The failure to break through the German defences had a traumatic effect on the morale of the French army and many divisions mutinied. Nivelle was superseded by Philippe Pétain, who adopted a strategy of healing and defence. On 19 May Pétain issued Directive No. 1 for limited offensives, intended to resume the wearing out of the German army while conserving French infantry. The new strategy was not one of passive defense, and in June and July the 4th, 6th and 10th Armies managed to conduct several limited attacks, and the First Army was sent to Flanders to participate in the Third Battle of Ypres. The British prolonged the Arras offensive into mid-May, despite uncertainty about French intentions, high losses and diminishing success, before moving their forces northwards to Flanders. The British captured Messines Ridge on 7 June and spent the rest of the year on the offensive in the Third Battle of Ypres and the Battle of Cambrai. The French conducted limited attacks at Verdun in August, which recaptured much of the remaining ground lost in 1916, and at Malmaison in October, which captured the west end of the Chemin des Dames and forced the Germans to withdraw from the ridge to the north bank of the Ailette. French army morale recovered from the strategic failure of the Nivelle offensive after Pétain introduced reforms increasing the welfare of French troops. 40 to 62 mutineers were shot as scapegoats. Background: strategic developments. Nivelle believed the Germans had been exhausted by the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and could not resist a breakthrough offensive, which could be completed in 24 to 48 hours. The main attack on the Aisne would be preceded by a large diversionary attack by the British Third and First Armies at Arras. The French War Minister, Hubert Lyautey, and Chief of Staff General Henri-Philippe Pétain opposed the plan, believing it to be premature. The British Commander-in-Chief, Sir Douglas Haig, supported the concept of a decisive battle but insisted that if the first two phases of the Nivelle scheme were unsuccessful, the British effort would be moved north to Flanders. Nivelle threatened to resign if the offensive did not go ahead and, having not lost a battle, had the enthusiastic support of the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. The French Prime Minister Aristide Briand supported Nivelle, but the War Minister Lyautey resigned during a dispute with the Chamber of Deputies, and the Briand government fell. A new government under Alexandre Ribot took office on 20 March. The Second Battle of the Aisne involved c. 1.2 million troops and 7,000 guns on a front from Reims to Roye, with the main effort against the German positions along the Aisne River. The original plan of December 1916 was plagued by delays and information leaks. By the time the offensive began in April 1917, the Germans had received intelligence of the Allied plan and strengthened their defences on the Aisne front. The German retreat to the Hindenburg Line left a belt of devastated ground up to 25 miles deep, in front of the French positions facing east from Soissons north to Saint-Quentin. Operation Alberic freed 13-14 German divisions, which were moved to the Aisne, increasing the German garrison to 38 divisions against 53 French divisions. The German withdrawal forestalled the attacks of the British and grouped Armées du Nord, but also freed French divisions. By late March, Gand had been reduced by 11 infantry, 2 cavalry divisions and 50 heavy guns, which went into the French strategic reserve. When Hindenburg and Ludendorff took over from Falkenhayn on 28 August 1916, the pressure being placed on the German army in France was so great that new defensive arrangements based on the principles of depth, invisibility and immediate counteraction were adopted, as the only means by which the growing material strength of the French and British armies could be countered. When a large portion of the German army was operating in Russia, instead of fighting the defensive battle in the front line or from shell-hole positions near it, the main fight was to take place behind the front line, out of view and out of range of enemy field artillery. Conduct of the defensive battle was published on 1 December 1916. The new manual laid down the organization for the mobile defense of an area, rather than the rigid defense of a trench line. Defensive positions necessary for the new method were defined in Principles of Field Position Construction. In the new defensive manual, unyielding defense of ground regardless of its tactical value was replaced by the defense of positions suitable for artillery observation and communication with the rear, where an attacking force would fight itself to a standstill and use up its resources while the defenders conserved their strength. Defending infantry would fight in areas, with the front divisions in an outpost zone up to 3,000 yards deep, with the main line of resistance placed on a reverse slope, in front of artillery observation posts kept far enough back to retain observation over the outpost zone. Behind the main line of resistance was a Großkampf zone, a second defensive area 1,500–2,500 yards deep, sighted as far as possible on ground hidden from enemy observation while in view of German artillery observers. A Rückhaltekampf zone further back was to be occupied by the reserve battalion of each regiment. Principles of Field Fortification was published in January 1917, and by April an outpost zone to be held by sentries had been built along the Western Front. Sentries could retreat to larger positions held by Starstrups of 5 men and an NCO, who would join the sentries to recapture sentry posts by immediate counter-attack. Defensive procedures in the battle zone were similar but with a greater number of troops. The front trench system was the sentry line for the battle zone garrison, which was allowed to move away from concentrations of enemy fire and then counter-attack to recover the battle and outpost zones. Such withdrawals were envisaged as occurring on small parts of the battlefield which had been made untenable by Allied artillery fire, as the prelude to Gegenstoß in der Stellung. Such a decentralized battle by large numbers of small infantry detachments would present the attacker with unforeseen obstructions. Resistance from troops equipped with automatic weapons, supported by observed artillery fire, would increase the further the advance progressed. A school was opened in January 1917 to teach infantry commanders the new methods. Given the Allies' growing superiority in munitions and manpower, attackers might still penetrate to the second line, leaving in their wake German garrisons isolated in wider Stanznester, still inflicting losses and disorganization on the attackers. As the attackers tried to capture the Wide Aisne and dig in near the German second line, Sturm battalions and Sturmregimenter of the counter-attack divisions would advance from the Rückhaltekampf zone into the battle zone, in a Gegenstoß aus der Tiefe. If this failed, the counter-attack divisions would take their time to prepare a methodical attack. if the lost ground was essential to the retention of the main position. Such methods required large numbers of reserve divisions ready to move to the battlefront. The reserve was obtained by creating 22 divisions by internal reorganization of the army, bringing divisions from the Eastern Front, and by shortening the Western Front, by withdrawing to the base of the Noyon salient in Operation Alberic. By the spring of 1917, the German army in the West had a strategic reserve of 40 divisions. Experience of the German First Army in the Somme battles was published on 30 January 1917. During the Battle of the Somme in 1916, Colonel von Lossberg had been able to establish a line of relief divisions. In his analysis of the battle, Lossberg opposed the granting of discretion to front trench garrisons to retire, as he believed that maneuver did not allow the garrisons to evade Allied artillery fire, which could blanket the forward area and invited enemy infantry to occupy vacated areas unopposed. Lossberg considered that spontaneous withdrawals would disrupt the counter-attack reserves as they deployed and further deprive battalion and division commanders of the ability to conduct an organized defense, which the dispersal of infantry over a wider area had already made difficult. Lossberg and others had severe doubts as to the ability of relief divisions to arrive on the battlefield in time to conduct an immediate counter-attack from behind the battle zone, and wanted the Somme practice of fighting in the front line to be retained and authority devolved no further than the battalion, so as to maintain organizational coherence, in anticipation of a methodical counter-attack after 24 to 48 hours by the relief divisions. Ludendorff was sufficiently impressed by the Lossberg memorandum to add it to the new Manual of Infantry Training for War. Prelude. German defensive preparations during the German withdrawal to the Siegfriedstellung in March 1917. A modest withdrawal took place in the neighborhood of Soissons. On 17 March, German defenses at Croix and Côte 132 were found to be empty, and as French troops followed up the retirement, German troops counterattacked at Régnier and Margiville, which reduced the speed of the French pursuit to a step-by-step advance. By April, the French advance had only progressed beyond Neuville-sur-Margiville and Lully. On 1 April, a French attack along the line of the Alettre-Lan road reached the outskirts of Lafaux and Varques-Salon. Varques-Seny and Varques-Salon were occupied a few days later.